The morning at ITV Studios had begun much like any other, yet there was an intangible electricity in the air that seasoned producers and junior assistants alike could feel humming beneath the polished surface of routine. Coffee cups clinked in the green room, studio assistants darted between corridors clutching last-minute cue cards, and camera operators ran their habitual checks with a kind of meticulousness that comes from years of knowing that live television leaves no margin for error. Lorraine Kelly, the undisputed anchor of Morning Warmth, had arrived earlier than usual, her trademark smile flashing as she greeted crew members by name, though those who knew her best could tell she was conserving her energy for something more demanding than the typical friendly segment with a soap star or an author plugging a new novel. Today's guest was different. Today's guest was Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, one of the most polarizing figures in modern British life. His presence promised a spike in ratings, an avalanche of headlines, and, for some, the chance to witness history in real time. Weeks of preparation had gone into this broadcast. Meetings had been held late into the evening to calibrate the balance between warmth and accountability, charm and challenge. ITV's producers knew that Harry was not just another celebrity promoting a project. He was a royal who had voluntarily stepped away from the institution, who had authored a memoir that shook the monarchy to its core, and who had been navigating an ongoing war with the press for what seemed like a lifetime. Lorraine herself, though unfailingly professional, had admitted privately to colleagues that she sensed this interview might be more fraught than most. For all his carefully orchestrated media appearances, Harry carried with him a volatility that no amount of California sunlight seemed capable of softening. The studio audience, hand-selected from hundreds of eager applicants, filled the seats with an enthusiasm that mirrored the crew's anticipation. Some clutched phones, hoping for a perfectly timed snapshot, while others whispered conspiratorially about whether Lorraine might dare to ask the kind of pointed questions that tabloids had been screaming for months. Even before the cameras rolled, there was a collective awareness that something extraordinary might unfold. Behind the scenes, Harry's handlers whispered in hushed tones, reminding him of talking points, massaging his schedule, and cautioning him, as they always did, against losing his temper. He appeared calm enough, dressed casually in a navy blazer and open-collared shirt, projecting the image of relaxed confidence he had perfected since moving to America. But to those trained to read body language, subtle clues told a more complicated story. His hands tapped lightly against the armrests of the green room chair. His shoulders carried a tension that contradicted the soft cadence of his voice when he thanked staff for their hospitality, and his eyes, though polite, carried the restless flicker of someone perpetually on guard. Lorraine, in contrast, radiated composure. Years of broadcasting had armed her with an unshakable poise, a quiet assurance that she could handle whatever might come her way. She moved through the studio floor like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her calm voice instructing assistants, her laugh disarming anxious crew members, her steady presence reminding everyone why she was the trusted face of morning television. Yet beneath her professional exterior, there flickered a spark of anticipation, an instinct born of decades in journalism that told her this interview would test her skills in ways that few others had. By the time the familiar theme music began and the red light blinked on, signaling that they were live, the studio thrummed with a palpable tension that both the audience and the crew felt in their bones. Lorraine began with her trademark warmth, her lilting Scottish accent filling living rooms across the country as she welcomed viewers back. She introduced Harry with genuine enthusiasm, listing his charitable projects and praising his advocacy for mental health. The applause was warm, the atmosphere cordial, and for a brief moment it seemed as though this might be just another well-managed royal appearance. But as Harry settled into the plush chair opposite Lorraine, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the first fissures began to show. He thanked her formally, his tone a careful mixture of Californian informality and royal precision, yet the grip of his hands on the armrests betrayed a hint of unease. Lorraine's opening questions were gentle, steering the conversation toward veterans' welfare and the new initiatives Harry had championed. His answers flowed smoothly, rehearsed yet heartfelt, touching on sacrifice, service, and the responsibility of those who have worn a uniform. The audience nodded approvingly, and producers behind the cameras exchanged quick, satisfied glances. On the surface, everything was going to plan. But television is as much about what lies beneath the surface as what is said aloud, and Lorraine's seasoned instincts began to register the subtle tension in Harry's posture, the flashes of defensiveness in his eyes, the way he seemed to lean ever so slightly forward as though bracing himself for impact. She knew then, even before the harder questions came, that this was no ordinary interview. She sensed she was steering a ship toward waters far rougher than the calm veneer of the opening minutes suggested. And though her smile never faltered, her mind sharpened, preparing for the storm that seemed destined to break. The crew, too, felt it, the way camera operators leaned just a little closer to their viewfinders, the way sound engineers adjusted dials with heightened attentiveness, the way producers whispered to one another with nervous energy, all recognizing in their gut that history was edging closer with every passing second. For all the planning, all the rehearsed answers, and all the stage-managed decorum, the reality of live television was about to take over, and the outcome would be something no one could fully control. The interview's opening rhythm unfolded with the practiced smoothness of a dance routine that both participants knew well, but the undercurrents of tension were already tugging at the seams. Lorraine's decades of experience had made her an expert at balancing lightheartedness with gravity, weaving laughter and solemnity into a seamless fabric that put even the most guarded guests at ease. With Harry, she adopted her usual posture of gentle curiosity, leaning forward slightly, eyes bright with encouragement. Her questions phrased in ways that seemed conversational but were carefully designed to elicit responses deeper than prepackaged soundbites. "Your work with veterans has been particularly close to your heart," she observed. Her tone warm, the cadence of her Scottish lilt soft enough to seem disarming, but focused enough to remind him and the audience alike that this was no idle chat. Harry responded, as expected, his voice steady, his gestures controlled, his anecdotes sprinkled with just enough detail to sound authentic without wandering into uncharted territory. He spoke of camaraderie forged in the barracks, of the transition from military discipline to civilian freedom, of the respect owed to those who had sacrificed. The audience nodded along appreciatively, some even applauding softly at his remarks. To the casual viewer, it was the very picture of a successful segment, Troil gravitas, mixed with relatable humanity. Yet those attuned to the subtleties could sense the fissures widening. Harry's hands, though ostensibly relaxed, gripped the armrests just a shade too tightly. His jaw clenched at moments when Lorraine's phrasing edged too close to personal terrain. His smile appeared and disappeared, like a mask adjusted for the camera, slipping ever so slightly when her questions touched upon contradictions in his carefully curated narrative. Lorraine noticed these details. She always did. The timing of her follow-ups shifted, her pauses lengthened, her gaze sharpened not in hostility, but in that practiced, professional way that signaled she had detected the presence of a seam and was prepared to pull gently at the thread until the fabric revealed what lay beneath. "You've spoken before about the challenges of leaving military service," she continued, still soft-spoken, but with the unmistakable precision of a surgeon probing sensitive tissue. "How do you reconcile your current lifestyle in California with the values you learned during your time in the forces?" The words seemed innocuous enough, yet they carried with them the weight of public perception. The yachts, the mansion in Montecito, the private jets juxtaposed against speeches about sacrifice and discipline. The studio seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his reply. Harry's face, still framed by the polite half-smile, shifted almost imperceptibly. A shadow of defensiveness flickered in his eyes. His shoulders straightened, and his reply came edged with a sharpness that hadn't been there a moment earlier. "I think that's a rather loaded question, Lorraine," he said, his voice polite but pointed. "My commitment to service hasn't changed simply because I've chosen to build a life elsewhere. If anything, I'm able to serve in ways that feel more authentic to who I am now." It was an answer that ticked every diplomatic box, yet the energy behind it revealed the tension coiled beneath the surface. Lorraine, her smile never wavering, acknowledged his reply with a slight nod, but pressed forward with the instinct of a veteran broadcaster who had sensed a shift. "Of course, nobody's questioning your commitment," she said evenly. Her decades in broadcasting had taught her that the most revealing moments came not from the answers guests rehearsed, but from the tension that arose when those answers were gently but persistently interrogated. "But surely you can see how that might appear contradictory to some people," she pressed, her tone still friendly but unmistakably firm. "You've made serious allegations about how you were treated, yet you continue to benefit from the very system you've criticized so heavily." The temperature in the studio rose almost imperceptibly. Camera operators adjusted lenses, sensing that something was building. Producers leaned in toward their monitors, whispering rapidly into headsets. Audience members shifted in their seats, their smiles fading into intent listening. What had begun as a promotional conversation was evolving into something far more unpredictable. Harry's composure, polished by months of media training, began to show its first cracks. His reply came faster now, sharper, his voice rising slightly above the smooth conversational tone that had characterized the interview thus far. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation," he shot back, his words clipped, his jaw tight. "It's easy to make judgments when you haven't lived through what I've experienced." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable in its edge. Lorraine, with all her decades in television, could not possibly understand his suffering. The shift in atmosphere was undeniable. Lorraine's smile remained, but her eyes hardened with a flicker of steel. She had been here before, with guests who bristled at accountability, with public figures who mistook her warmth for weakness. She leaned forward ever so slightly, the movement subtle but signaling a change in tone. She was no longer simply conversing, she was holding him to account. "I'm not here to make judgments," she replied, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm here to ask questions that many of our viewers would ask if they were sitting where I am, and those questions aren't going away." The audience stirred again, sensing the shift, feeling the rising voltage in the air. It was no longer just an interview. It was a confrontation in slow motion, the kind of live television moment that could not be scripted, edited, or controlled. Behind the cameras, Harry's handlers exchanged worried glances, already recognizing that the trajectory had changed, that their carefully managed plan was unraveling. What Lorraine knew instinctively, and what Harry was only beginning to realize, was that this was the point where the interview ceased to be about polished talking points and became about character, temperament, and truth under pressure. And though neither of them could yet predict the scale of the storm about to break, the first cracks had appeared, and the studio could feel it like the distant rumble of thunder on an otherwise clear morning. If the earlier exchanges had exposed hairline cracks in Harry's polished facade, what came next struck like a hammer against already strained glass. Lorraine, who had built her reputation on charm laced with steel, chose her moment with surgical precision. She let a beat of silence linger after his defensive response, long enough for the audience to shift uncomfortably in their seats, long enough for Harry himself to feel the weight of his words echoing into the void. Then, leaning forward with that trademark mixture of kindness and insistence, she asked the question that had hovered like a shadow over his entire media tour. But Harry, when you speak about privacy, about wanting to protect your family from intrusion, how do you reconcile that with the Netflix documentaries, the Spotify podcasts, the book deal? Some would say those projects opened the door wider than the press ever did. The effect was immediate. A ripple moved through the audience, small gasps, nervous laughter, murmurs exchanged between strangers who knew instinctively that they had just witnessed a pivot from uncomfortable to explosive. The producers in the control booth sat up straighter, some whispering frantically into headsets, others signaling camera operators to tighten their frames, anticipating a moment that would soon be replayed endlessly across social media and news channels. Harry's jaw flexed visibly, his teeth gritting against the pressure of restraint. His prepared composure faltered. "That's not a fair comparison," he said, the words quick, clipped-edged with the heat of suppressed frustration. "Those projects were on our terms, telling our story in our voice. That's completely different from being hounded, chased, and lied about by a ruthless tabloid press." His voice had risen, sharper now, filling the studio with an energy that was no longer conversational but confrontational. The warmth that had once accompanied his anecdotes about veterans or family had evaporated, replaced by the defensive cadence of a man cornered by the very narrative he had hoped to control. Lorraine did not flinch. Her smile softened, but her eyes never left his, and her voice carried the steady authority of a professional who had faced down countless public figures in denial. "I understand the distinction you're making," she replied calmly, "but surely you can see why many people, ordinary people watching at home, might struggle with that difference. To them, it looks like you've rejected one kind of publicity while embracing another, one you're able to profit from. Is it really privacy you're seeking, or control?" The words landed with the weight of a verdict. Gasps rippled through the studio. The phrasing privacy versus control cut to the heart of the debate that had dogged Harry since his move to America. And in that moment, the tension that had simmered beneath the surface erupted into the open. Harry leaned forward, his voice rising further, each word punctuated with the unmistakable sting of indignation. "It is absolutely about privacy," he snapped, his hands gripping the armrests now, as though anchoring himself against the current of the conversation. "It's about my right to protect my wife and children from the same toxic culture that destroyed my mother. How dare anyone suggest otherwise?" The audience reacted audibly, some with sympathetic nods, others with murmurs of skepticism. The emotion in his voice was raw, real, undeniable, but it was also edged with anger, the kind that felt less like controlled passion and more like a loss of composure. Lorraine let the silence stretch again, a technique she wielded masterfully, allowing the weight of his outburst to settle into the air before stepping lightly back in. "No one would ever question your right to protect your family," she said gently, though the firmness beneath her tone remained. "But what people are asking is whether you can claim to want a private life while simultaneously signing deals worth hundreds of millions to share that private life with the world. Isn't there a contradiction there?" Harry's face flushed, his carefully rehearsed calm crumbling further with every word. His reply came fast, sharp, and louder still. "There is no contradiction. None. People who say that have no idea what it feels like to live every day under constant attack, to have lies printed about you, to have your safety threatened. We told our story because we had no choice, because nobody else would tell the truth." His voice boomed now, filling the studio with the unmistakable force of a man not just defending himself, but lashing out at an entire system, an entire audience, perhaps even the very interviewer seated across from him. The atmosphere in the studio shifted palpably. What had begun as polite entertainment had transformed into a battleground of words, principles, and reputations. Lorraine, unfazed, met the storm head-on, her posture steady, her expression measured. "Harry," she said, her tone unwavering, "you've accused the press of exploiting your pain. Can you not see that some would argue you are now doing the same, turning your private struggles into a product?" The sentence fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples that no one could ignore. Audience members exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. Behind the cameras, producers whispered urgently, already imagining the headlines. Prince Harry explodes on Lorraine. Harry's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping slightly but vibrating with restrained fury. "That's offensive," he said, the words cutting and deliberate. "It's offensive to suggest that sharing my truth, my family's truth, is the same as exploitation. What we've done is shine a light on injustice, not profit from pain. If people can't understand that, then maybe they don't want to." The defensiveness in his tone betrayed the vulnerability beneath, and Lorraine sensed it. She did not relent. Instead, she pressed further, her tone now that of a quiet but relentless prosecutor. "But surely, Harry, you must admit that the money involved the book advances. The streaming deal complicates that argument. If it was only about truth, why not tell it without the millions attached?" The studio air thickened. Harry's composure, once carefully maintained, now shattered fully. His voice rose again, louder than ever, sharp with anger and incredulity. "Because the truth has value," he thundered, his hands gesturing emphatically now, his entire body animated with the force of his defense. "Do you think my family should live on nothing while the very institution that cut us off continues to thrive? Do you think justice is free? Do you think telling the truth doesn't come at a cost?" The eruption sent a jolt through the studio, the rawness of his anger reverberating off the walls. Some in the audience applauded, moved by the fire in his voice. Others sat frozen, uneasy at the spectacle of a prince unraveling live on morning television.